Welcome back to the Linux Academy Nginx Deep Dive. In this video, we're going to take a look into logging a little bit more, and we're going to do that by covering how access logging works, what we can do with log formats, and how error logging works. To get started with this, we're going to go into the etc nginx nginx.conf, which we've looked in here before when we first started this course, and there were a couple lines in here that related to logging. In fact, all three of the directives that we're going to talk about are already in here. And so we want to get a better understanding of what exactly these do. The first one we're going to talk about is going to be log format. And log format and access log, the directive used right underneath it, both come from the HTTP log module. And there are not very many log modules directives. So log format allows us to actually go and create a named format. And that's what this first portion is. So compression in this example would be the name of a format. And then this string, and when you're separating it here, so they just go to another line and then it will concatenate those itself. But this string is the information that would be represented if somebody used that as their access logging format. The format has nothing to do with error logging, so that is one thing to note. And what we already have pre-existing for every one of the servers that we've got is the main format here. And that has this set up. And quite a few of these variables we've seen, and some of them we haven't, but they're pretty self-explanatory in terms of what they do. And the way you go about setting a logging type is through access log for using this sort of thing where we have a format to it. And that's going to take a file here, and then you give it the name of the format that you want to use. One thing that you'll come across fairly frequently when you're looking at other people's Nginx configuration, or if you're just kind of researching things across the web, is that you'll see the combined log format type used, but you'll never see it actually defined. And that's because it is the log format that comes prepackaged with Nginx. So if you see combined in place of main here, that's what you're actually seeing, and it's a format that's used with compatibility, and it actually maps to the same sort of format that's used inside of an Apache server. There is a definition of it inside of here. So if we search a little bit, we should be able to find that there is combined referenced somewhere. It's right here. So log format combined, this one is always there, and you'll never see this actual string really when you're looking around. Before we move on and define our own log format type, let's talk about error logging for a second. And error logging is simpler because there is no log format. You have to specify a file you want it to go to, and then you need to give it a logging level. And the way that this works, and this comes from the Nginx core module by itself, is that this level can be one of quite a few. So it can go from debug, info, notice, warn, error, critical, alert, or emerge. And this is in order of severity. So what happens is when something is actually logged, you set a log level at the moment you're logging it. And if somebody decides that they only want to have logs that are logged with the error level put to the file, then you'll never see warn, notice, info, or debug. But you will, if somebody set it to error, you will always see error and everything that is more severe. So as we move through this particular list, if you selected debug, you would see everything that is logged, whether it's in debug, notice, info, warn, error, crit, alert, or emerge. And as you move further into the severity, get towards the higher severity levels, you'll see less and less information actually show up in your log. So since this is warn, if we look at where that's at in the list again, warn is kind of middle of the road. It'll show you more information than it won't, but you will never see notice, info, or debug information in the error log as it is predefined. This is good to know if you're first working with this or you have something that you're experimenting with and you want everything that is possibly logged to kind of be shown. You can change this so that it's using a less severity. And then if one of the applications you're working with is logging at the info level, you'll actually be able to see those logs. So if we exit this file and we take a look at the existing access log that we've got, and we can use less for this, but we'll go to var log nginx access. That was the file that was defined in the access log directive. And then if we go all the way to the bottom here, we can see that there are quite a few requests that have been made. But with the information as we see it right here, we're not getting a whole lot. We don't know exactly where the request went. For instance, these right here, these 4, were from a previous video when we were demonstrating the round-robin request style, but we have no idea what server they went to in this particular case, or what virtual host. So this is where defining your own logging format can be really useful, so that you can get logs into a shape that you know how to read and provide all the information that you really care about. So let's go ahead and do that now. We're going to define a new log format. We're going to put our new format in the nginx.conf file so that it's accessible by every one of our actual virtual hosts. And the way we do that is by putting the log format basically in the same spot that we have this one right here. I'm actually going to copy the main log format. And then what we really want to see here is going to be the additional information of the host. So this will be the host that was requested. So if this was an IP address specifically, then we will see that. If this was a domain name like we've been seeing, then we will see that at the beginning of the list. And this is just giving us a little bit of differentiating data. And we can change the name. We actually need to change the name. And we're going to set it to virtual host, or vhost in this case. Now we can save this. And since this happens before we include all of our other configuration files, this log format will be available to us. So it's important that we create the format before we actually do the inclusion of everything inside the confd directory. Now we're going to go into our confd photos example, and inside of our actual server, we're going to set the access log to var log nginx access.log, and then we're going to set the actual type to be the new vhost that we had set up. And I'm going to copy this. I'm going to save and quit. And then we're going to do that exact same thing, except for we're going to put it this time into the blog. Going to save and quit on this one, and then we'll do the same thing once again into notes. Save and quit on that. Now we will see if there's any issues. It doesn't look like there's any problem. We'll do system ctl reload nginx. And now we can make some requests to these actual hosts. So we'll do a curl header host on the notes.example.com. And then we're actually going to redirect this output because we don't really care to see it. We just actually want it to happen. And then we'll do another one. This time we'll set the host to blog.example.com. Now, if we less var log nginx access.log, and we go all the way down to the bottom, we can see that the format is very obviously different now, and it's set to show us the actual name of the host that we are requiring. So knowing the variables that we have access to from Nginx itself within the context of an HTTP server with the request as it's going through, you can utilize those when you create a custom logging format. One last thing I want to cover before we finish with this is what it looks like to utilize syslog with this, because in a lot of situations when you're actually going through and deploying Nginx, you're going to have a logging collection server of some kind set up. And on a lot of Linux distributions by default, there's going to be an rsyslog service that's already running for you. So we can connect to syslog running on the CentOS machine without needing to do anything else. But if you set this up to be a remote machine, it would work much the same. And what we're going to do is we're going to change our access log from going to the access log file to instead writing to syslog through a socket. And then syslog's going to determine where on disk it's going to write that, and that actually will change a little bit depending on what you're working with. But for right now, we're just going to care about how it works on CentOS. And we'll go into the notes here, and we have to change our access log directive here a little bit. And the way that's going to work is we're going to use syslog : and then we can give it a server attribute that's going to be Unix. And this is going to go to devlog. That's actually where the socket is going to be located. And this is kind of an odd syntax here, but there are a number of parameters that we can actually pass to syslog that are going to take this key value setup that server and Unix devlog actually utilize. The Nginx documentation provides a separate piece of documentation about logging with syslog. So if we go and we open up this particular page, we can kind of see how this is going to work out. So when we go to utilize this, there are different keys and values that we can pass to the syslog. And here's a more elongated answer here where you're just chaining them on. And notice that unlike our usual way of doing this where we have key values, they would be separated by spaces. Since this one is part of an argument that is already part of a directive, it's going to be using commas after this colon here for syslog. And then afterwards, you're still going to set the name of the access log because you're still using the access log directive itself. It's just this is a special stylized version of the first parameter that you can use. It is worth noting that, like I said, we are using the Unix socket that already exists at devlog, but if you wanted to go to a separate rsyslog server, then you could also use a server name here. So this could be a domain or an IP address. Let's go back to our actual example here and see what happens when we save and quit. Test this. And when we reload it, we had set that up inside of the notes.example. So if we curl header host notes.example.com, and we check once again at the end of our access log, it should no longer be there. So not that the old request won't show up, but we shouldn't have a new request to notes at the very bottom. So there's still just the one to notes and then the one to blog. And this is where things get a little bit different. We have syslog running. Depending on the operating system you're running, the actual file that that's going to write to is going to be a little bit different. On CentOS, that's going to be at var log messages. And if you're on a Debian-based system, it would be in var log syslog. But let's look at the very last line of var log messages. And now we can see that we're getting this Nginx line here. Everything prior to this is extra information that comes from syslog. And then everything right here, this is our actual accessing log format that we had already predefined. So now we have it logging to rsyslog. It's figuring out where the file's at. And if we wanted to, we could have this logging to a remote server. So in this video, we took the long look at logging here, how we can specify our own log format. Also knowing that we can write our logs to a syslog server, whether that be local or remote. And then error logging, we briefly touched on the fact that it's going to write to a file, it doesn't utilize a format, and it has varying levels of severity that you can utilize. But for the most part, the actual error log setup that comes by default with Nginx is going to be good enough.